We have a lot of yeses, a couple more yeses. So I would say so far, Charles, the consensus is yes, that we're definitely seeing that. So then the next question Charles and I were really just kind of curious about is, besides your own personal stress that you've been observing, have you also been observing that those around you or others that you have seen are also acting like they are more stressed? And again, if you can just put a simple yes or no in our chat feature, we would love to see that as well. And again, more yeses, more yeses. Definitely, someone says definitely. So what we really wanted to learn a little bit more about today too, because I was telling Charles how what I noticed was the other day I was driving on the highway and I felt like I was going a little bit faster than I normally would, and I looked at the speedometer on my car and I was going 80 miles an hour. But that also is what the traffic pace was going. So if everybody can just share a little bit, when you say that you have observed that others around you are more stressed, maybe just in a couple of words or a quick sentence, what are some of the things that you're seeing that are indicating to you that people are indeed more stressed? Charles, what are you noticing as far as what you're seeing people do that would say that they're more stressed?
I've noticed a number of different things. First, I was at an event the other day, and people asked me a similar question, like, what are you seeing? And before I answered it, I said, what are you seeing? Like, what is happening around you? And people gave me, like, so many different, and this was a family get-together. It wasn't like an in-depth scientific look by any stretch. It was more like, here's my general observations. And they happen to be around driving, a lot of them. One passing somebody out, and another one extending a physical digit to them as they pass the person around, who was going slow to begin with. And the person looked in the car and saw it was an elderly person and thought, oh my gosh, how we must be all so stressed. We're all doing things differently. We're doing things that aren't us. And I'll give you a really great example. This one happened today. Someone was describing to me in their kitchen, they have an island. And this is a 19-year-old student athlete telling me this, that around their island, you have to like get by somebody to reach certain areas, like if you're going to get a drink, something like that. And every time they would say, excuse me, the other person would say, excuse me, like frustrated back. It's like, how could this be happening? This is like a family member, and what he described it as was the close proximity that we have had for so long has just put everybody's threshold at a different place. And this is a student athlete getting ready for the fall, and now hearing that that's not going to happen, and the stress of that had everybody feeling even worse, but this feeling that we're all on top of each other has been the first part of it. I want to say the second part of it, which is now that we're more out and about, there's now this feeling that we have to make up for lost time. So we're faster on the roads, we're faster in a grocery store, we're less attentive, we're less tolerant of lines that we are in. Everybody seems to have this like different threshold of what they are upset about. And these are the mundane day-to-day things. We have uncertainty of academic year. We have medical complications. We have issues. I have a sister-in-law who just had a knee replacement that was put off for 3 months because of the coronavirus. and now is dealing with the stress and the healing of that and the impact that it has on her family. So there's medical, there is athletic, there's academic, there's travel, issues around travel. I just had to cancel a trip. I would have gotten back yesterday from Texas, but that was canceled because of COVID-19. The list goes on and on. It's basically endless the way we have been inundated by stress that's all exacerbated by what is happening with COVID-19.
So then can you explain to us, Charles, then what is happening from a physiological standpoint? Like, obviously, we all know, yes, it has been thing on top of thing on top of thing that has made us feel stressed. But can you explain then why it is that we have the reactions that we do and why we may be more likely to treat somebody, not kindly because we're on overload?
Well, I'll tell you, I think that's a great way to look at it. It first of all calls for self-reflection, self-awareness, and I think this is central to what's happening is understanding the physiology, because once we have a better understanding and working level of awareness from that, we can actually start to do something about what we're experiencing. But the technical term for it is something I mentioned just briefly, and this gives me a chance to amplify it a little bit, the concept of homeostatic capacity, which basically is the capability that we have, or any system has, but specifically we as individuals, that we have the ability to return to our homeostasis or our capacity for balance. So if you think of it, a great way to conceptualize this, just to get an image of it, is for people who might be old enough on the call who remember these things, they're called weebles. There was even a term for them. Weebles wobble, but they don't fall down. There were these little toys that no matter what you did, you couldn't knock it over. That's homeostatic capacity, the ability to have this balance, to not let life knock you down, right? But that changes over time. And when we're young, we seem to have that. And like, for example, toddlers, everything about that toddlers are experiencing, for them, health means almost the absence of anything. Health means nothing. I am just doing great. As we get older, that changes. And this is, I want to talk about the threshold for this too. But as we, when we're younger, we don't feel cold. We could be outside and we have to be told to come in. We get older and these polar vortexes, we can barely get to our car from our office door and then back, so we struggle more. I had a great friend in high school who seemed to have this capacity to manage stress better than anybody knew. This is the type of guy who could fall asleep riding a bike downhill, evidenced by the fact that he did that. He managed to do that. By the time he was 30, he couldn't sleep. He had eating difficulties. Stress got to him in a totally different way. So over time, we change in the way we react and adapt to stress. And the reason for that is if we're not managing our homeostatic capacity, it could be managing us. So that delicate balance, it changes over time. And we could fall prey to some of those changes, or we could make it even stronger. So that's the first part of it. Homeostatic capacity is that physiological ability to bounce back. And the second part of it is the stress threshold that accompanies it. When our homeostasis is thrown off, our threshold to react to stress is completely different than it is all things equal. We become, the lighter things in life are no longer as light. They're more difficult. That's why traffic becomes more problematic. That's why lines in a store become more problematic, That's why our time management becomes more problematic, because I wanted to do this, this, and this in this amount of time, but I have to be back for a 1 o'clock meeting, whatever that might be. All of those things physiologically do a number on us, and we don't even fully realize it sometimes until it's pointed out to us by somebody else. One last example of it, a person told me today, they defined their level of happiness as 20% lower as a result of the stress they're experiencing, because, and their specific reason for it was how much greater the uncertainty of their life is than it was 3 months ago. So all of these things factor into homeostatic capacity and our stress tolerance threshold.
So really then what it comes down to is that we really only have so much to give, right? There's only so much in that store of what we can deal with. And I think too, a lot of people have been saying to me, well, I feel bad that I'm not one of these people that's remodeling my house right now or redoing my landscaping. And I have really said to them, you know what? It's okay. Because if it's a capacity issue, if you're using your energy for other things, that's okay, and that's where we all differ, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And different things impact us, at different times. And I think the other way that we look at this is, okay, if that's what's happening to us, what do we do about it? And, I kind of look at it as, I call them like, oxygen shots. How do we get jolts of oxygen, mental oxygen? And again, a couple people today had this idea of all of those things are gone for me, where I usually get that. For students in school, I don't get those. How's your running? How's your training? How's your studying? Where are you going to school? Those interactive oxygen hits that just make us feel better. We don't get them from the community. The other day, someone told me it feels like they're in a 10-year winter. All of the things that I normally have that give me that ability to be stronger through the interaction, I'm not getting that. I'm not getting the community, those specific areas. Church is one example for people. School is another. A lot of the people who get that from work. So we actually have to find some of those things and seek them out, because if our natural way of getting them isn't happening, the oxygen for our brain, that idea is where can we get it otherwise? And so to me, there's two ways to look at it. The first one is our own selves and understanding our thought process. And we have, when stress is hitting us, the way we view it, we basically have psychologically two ways we adapt in our cognitive decoding of these situations. When our thoughts are contracting oriented, we become more stressed. When a thought is contracting, we constrict internally, we become more stressed as a result of this. When we can view things in an expansive way, psychologically expansive, we're stronger, we feel more fit, we could take more on, and our physiology adapts and responds accordingly. So we could manage our stress specifically by how we are interpreting and decoding what's happening around us. That's key. The second one is how we can create, without recreating the former areas that we got that positive reinforcement socially, is to set up different opportunities for the socialization. A couple people today, for example, their examples were, I will call more often, I interact with my family more often, but I also internalize a more positive psychological outlook. So the last part I want to say with it, Martin Seligman is one of called the father of positive psychology. he has a framework for wellness in flourishing called PERMA. And PERMA is an acronym for some very specific ways that when we could tap into this, we are accessing a greater level of well-being. And that is positive emotion is P. E is engagement, when we are engaged beyond just ourselves, the best that we can connect. R is relationships, the relationships in our lives. M is making meaning out of events and situations that happen to us, the greatest meaning we can. And A is continuing to seek accomplishment. When we, regardless of what's happening around us, when we still have a focus on being a little bit better tomorrow than we were today, a little bit better today than we were yesterday, when we can say yes to those areas in our lives, and we could be mindful and aware in practicing that, he describes it as there's no one who wouldn't say yes to positive emotion. There's no one who wouldn't say yes to greater engagement. We can all say yes to positive relationships. We can all say yes to greater meaning in life, and we all can say yes to being the most accomplished selves that we can be. So when we can tap into those, we are continuing to move our health and well-being in a positive direction. So that's how we manage those difficult situations.
So maybe even a starting point would be to really, I love the categories that you gave, and I'm hoping that people maybe wrote those down. And do you think a good first step would maybe just be to look at those categories and think about what you yourself can maybe take on to move yourself forward in one of those areas?
I think first of all, even where you're going with that, the idea that anything that's self-appraisal oriented, when we can be understanding of it, intentional to get better, I call it deliberately developmental, when we are looking at it out of that lens, where can I get better? What is something I can look at about what I'm doing and how I'm dealing things right now that I can get better? If our appraisal or self-assessment is only a beat down, oh, this is terrible, I can't believe you're not doing better with this, it's not necessarily going to be helpful. But when it's deliberately developmental, here's an opportunity that I can get better, even in a difficult situation, that is going to provide meaning and a goal and a purpose and something that is going to lead towards accomplishment. And several people this week, that was their strategy coming in. I want to look at where I'm going to get better, how I'm going to get better. That's an expansive thought, that I am interested in where I'm going to get better and how I'm going to do it, and I'm using this as a process to do that. That's an expansive thought, and that alone is a great starting point. So you make a great point. When we are in assess and understand awareness-seeking mode, that in and of itself is going to help us manage ourselves better, but it has to be out of the lens of how we're going to use it to help us rather than just be critical and go nowhere with it. So the developmental, I usually describe it as intentional, purposeful, deliberate, and meaningful. When we're approaching things out of that lens, we are going to take ourselves to a better place.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So I want to then, move us forward and open it up for any questions that you may have for Charles. You can go ahead and put those in the chat. And while you're thinking about any questions you may want to ask Charles, when we ask people what their stressors were, what they were noticing, I'm noticing a lot of the comments have to do with worrying. And I know that we have a lot of worrying going on with everything that's happened with the virus. So Charles, do you have any advice, any tips for those of us that just really find ourselves worrying about a lot of different things?
I do. In fact, that is probably, if there was one word that I would say sums up so many people's experience for the last, you could easily round it off to 5 years, but the last 4 or 5 months has exponentially raised it. The biggest worry typically comes from, and this is something I had mentioned at one time before, but certainly it could amplify it a little bit here and expand on the notion of it. But worrying usually comes from the mind being caught up in the past or worried about the future and not present in the moment. If we look at it from an athletic standpoint, we can't win a point 10 minutes ago because it's gone. We can't win a point 10 minutes from now because it hasn't happened yet. But when we can consciously develop the skill to keep our mind in our head where our feet are, of being mindfully aware of the moment, and in it, there's nothing better than being able to do that, because we can win the point we're in. We can't win the point of the past or the future. So it's a developed capacity, and I say developed or acquired, and I use those words advisedly, because we are not set up that way from a neuropsychiatry standpoint. We are hardwired to go past our future, but we're not hardwired to manage the moment. The mind is prone to wandering rather than being where we are right now. So developing that capacity is our greatest skill that we could possibly have. And the other thing that I'd like to say about it, more than anything else, is when we can be altruistic, like not only in the moment and develop that, but also what I can do for others. When we become other-focused and we become less self-absorbed, and that tends to limit worrying and manage worrying. But more than anything else, because when people will push back on this notion of, well, I got to think about the future. Yeah, think about the future. We have to. It's called planning. When we plan for the future, I describe it as the vacation example. If we're going to take a vacation, you want to make flight reservations, hotel reservations, maybe car rental reservations, dining reservations. You're thinking of the future and you're planning for your future. And that's a wonderful, wonderful thing to do. But when planning goes to making something catastrophic and worrying, well, what if the flight's canceled? What if the flight doesn't work? What if there's a mechanical problem? What if the hotel won't have a reservation? That's worrying. So when you could make a distinction between your capacity to plan, do that. We need to be planful as much as possible. That actually helps us feel that we're managing our stress. We're taking care of everything. But when you have the awareness to see that now I'm going from planning to worrying, be able to say, okay, I've planned, I've made the plan, now I can be aware, I can cut that off and not worry about 10 days, 10 months, 10 years, but take myself more to the present, that acquired capacity, and cutting off from planning to worry is going to help anybody manage their worry more effectively.
I think it's really important to remember that worrying just robs you of the joy that you could be having at the moment. Worrying about something that hasn't happened yet takes away something right now that's going on that may be really amazing. So again, it's what you speak to, being in the present, really focusing on what do we have right here and right now.
Yeah, it's the thief of time. Worrying is the thief of time and thief of our present and thief of our experience. And it takes us away, even when we're outdoors, just even coping, we call it green time, taking in the awe of what's around us. When we're able to do that, we're much more effective in appreciating that. And that is heightening our threshold for stress tolerance. It's increasing our homeostatic balance, and just making us healthier people when we're doing that. But again, and what I'm saying is we're not hardwired necessarily for that to happen. We have to make it happen. And that's the intentional part. And as you described it, we're much better when we're in that place. That's for sure.
Well, and it's like so many things. We have to work at it. You know, if it's something that we haven't done before, and this is a brand new concept for us, we have to start by taking that first step and working at it a little bit, and we're going to develop it like any other muscle that we may have. So again, if you want to ask Charles a question today, feel free to chat those in. You can chat them in just to myself, Linda Golik, or you can put them for everyone to see. So Charles, I just want to touch a little bit too on the idea that I'd be remiss if I didn't bring kind of the well-being aspect into this. And how do some of those healthy behaviors that we can take on, how does that help us in terms of coping with some of the stress we're experiencing right now?
Well, in a number of different ways. One is any act of compassion, whether it's towards ourselves or towards somebody else, is creating a biological oxytocin flood, and we are in that. We are in a much better place. So we are naturally feeling better. We are people born to help each other and take care. And sometimes that erodes. But if you think about it, a guy named Dr. Keltner, a researcher out of University of Cal Berkeley, describes this innate feeling that we have that we always want to help. When we are compassionate to the extent that we give birth to these wildly unprepared small babies, comparatively speaking to any other species on the planet, that they are, other species can take care of themselves in a short period of time. We sometimes are raising people until they're 49 years old, or at least until 9. We have to do that. So we are compassionate people. We live with the theory that Darwin said survival is of the fittest. And there's a great truth to that. We have to do everything we can to make ourselves physically and emotionally fit. And we're always in a process of doing that. But Darwin, over time, came to a different psychological and physiological place with that theory, in that compassion is actually our strongest instinct, which is why most mothers and fathers or sisters, brothers, any family members, whomever, we would do anything to protect a loved one. You hear stories of heroism in the situations in school events and so forth, these tremendous stories of compassion. When we are doing things altruistically for others and having compassion, we are in a place where we are feeding ourselves, not just helping other people. So we're accessing that strongest emotion that we have, which isn't just survival, it's compassion for other people, and in turn, we are helping ourselves. So that's how we can help ourselves. And by the way, the one other thing that we know that biologically, physiologically helps us as much as anything else is anytime we get a little dose of humor. And humor is one of those other mental oxygen hits that I'm talking about, that anytime we can have any humorous experience, we are greatly enhancing our stress threshold and our homeostatic capacity, and as a result, our overall well-being, which I think at the end of the day is part of what I'm always trying to do, is help people to see that one day I hope we all can practice our mental well-being, because you used the word practice before. We have to keep getting better, being as good and aware of getting better in that regard with the same vigor as we do the rest of our physical well-being. If we can do those things, we are on the greatest track to being the best version of ourselves.
Love that. Love that. And that's why it feels so good to laugh, right? Because I mean, think about how good it feels when we're laughing. We just need to find ways to have more of that, I think.
Yeah, we could all afford a little bit more. There's absolutely no doubt about that. I'd agree 100%. Great point.
So I do have a question that came in, Charles. So someone wrote, I wake up at night worrying about things. I do have a pad of paper next to my bed and I write things down, but that doesn't always work. Do you have any suggestions?
There's a couple things that first of all, know that you're not alone. Almost everybody, there's two reasons why people have difficulty sleeping. It's called initial and then terminal, is that when we have trouble falling asleep because those thoughts are happening, or when we wake up with them. And it's difficult, but I would say, one, you're definitely in the right direction. Sometimes just jotting it down, I call it download. When you could download what's there rather than keeping it there, getting it from your head to pencil and paper is a great strategy. But the other thing is, with that worry that you're having typically is about what people will often tell me, I woke up in the middle of the night and forgot the call I need to make, or I should have called so-and-so, or I needed to email, I can't believe I didn't do it. And then that catapults the worry into tomorrow. As soon as I get in, I got to do this. I have to call them, that what's going to happen there. So that's that mind going from past to future where worry comes in. So even then, I would say we could do a half or a full discussion on this, and maybe that would be a great next step in this. But right now, what I would say is anything that you can do, and the best one is a breath focus. Take a 15-second breath, in for 5, hold for 2, exhale for 8. That is a 15-second breath with the exhale longer than the inhale. That's the key to managing what got revved up in worry. And if you could do that for 4 repeats, which is 1 minute, so that 1 minute is consciously taking that worry from here to here, and you're more likely to go back to sleep. And just developing that practice and knowing that you're doing something with it. The other thing that I find most helpful for sleep, and as a past marathon runner, we always used to joke, anybody running a marathon, you don't sleep much before the night before a marathon, but you rest. So when your mind is going and you're really worried, and this is a big day coming up, and you feel you can't fall asleep, being able to say, okay, here's the deal. I may not sleep well, but I have my legs elevated, and I'm going to be the most rested runner tomorrow if I'm not the most well-slept runner tomorrow. And you're going to do one of two things. One, you're going to be well-rested, or 2, it's going to take away the worry and you're actually going to fall asleep, which is actually what happens. So if you could manage what's in your head in the most effective and efficient way, you're going to have a better night's sleep and you're going to minimize that worry. But definitely the way you look at what it is and say, what can I do now? Use that planning versus worry. That's going to be a helpful idea. I see a message someone just said about Headspace. If anybody's using Headspace, if anybody's using Calm, if anybody's using SoundCloud, and even specifically in SoundCloud, Meg James has a couple sleep items. They are fantastic. I've never heard a voice as good as hers to be able to do that. And several of clients, and when I say several, I probably mean even as much as, even off the top of my head, 20 to 25, swear by Headspace. Andy Puddicombe is the founder and the voice of it, and there's a sleep component to it. And people who had difficulties finding anything that was helpful, when they latched onto this, now they swear they can't live without it. So anything along those lines are going to be helpful to you. And even if it's a quick 5-minute one on YouTube, I encourage people to experiment and find which ones work best for them. It will be a help. There's no doubt about it. So yeah, I think next time around we could do something. There's so much we could do just on this area. It's fantastic. So good luck to you in working through that, and we'll look forward to more discussion on that topic and others related to what we're discussing.
And I just wanted to add a little tip that I do, and it really works for me, and I think it's because it clears my mind. And I literally read this in an article years ago. If you're having problems sleeping because you can't shut off your mind, count from 300 backwards by threes. So 300, 297, 294. What it does is it engages your mind in something enough that you stop thinking about the other stuff, but it's also enough of an activity that it calms you. And honest to goodness, I rarely get down to 200 when I do that, and I'm having problems sleeping. Yeah. So for whatever that's worth.
It's breaking the back and forth ping pong. So what you just described is absolutely great. It's a great strategy. But it would take me to the one last thing I would say about it, which is it is an experiment and a practice, and everybody finds eventually what is their best go-to strategy. Sometimes it takes a little bit of trial and error, but people do, and when you find what works, you want to stick with it.
Great. Awesome. Well, I don't have any other questions listed here, but I want to thank everybody for participating today and chatting in those answers. We really appreciate learning more about our audience and what's going on with everybody. We're going to continue to do these segments monthly. So our next one is going to be, I believe it's Thursday, August 13th, Thursday, 1 o'clock, just like this one. Charles will be bringing more amazing content to us, helping us, and perhaps we'll expand more on the stress and the worrying and start to learn how we can look at that a little bit differently. Any parting words today, Charles? Anything you want to leave our audience with today?
I would just say that continuing to enjoy your summer. Many people that I'm talking with lately, that's been their big thing is I love the summer, but it's been hot. But we live in Northeast Wisconsin, so we shouldn't complain too much. And most people that I know are really, really just taking in this time of year and saying, I have stress, but the more I can look at what I do have in addition to that. So yeah, the gratefulness, the gratitude, even one thing that we could have chimed in on the sleep part too, being able to say what we do find gratefulness for always is a strategy for self-management as well. So good luck to everybody as we continue to get through what we're going through, and enjoy the rest of your July. And thanks for your time today.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great day. Remember that what you focus on expands. So choose what it is you're going to focus on. All right? Thank you, everyone. Have a good rest of the day. Thank you, Charles.
Thank you.